Hello and welcome back to the show. Today, I am excited to be bringing you a recap on the research spotlight of last month. So, if you haven't been listening to my podcast for a while or following me on Instagram, you will not know that every month I send out a research spotlight email to those on my email list, and you get it directly to your inbox. And it is basically a piece of paper. It's a paper that I have chosen around research or a particular statement or whatever it might be that I think is extremely valuable or that I have used in my own practice. And I summarize it in what I think is relevant because I used to hate reading research. I actually said this to one of my mentees the other day that when I was at uni, I would listen to I was in research, like the subject research. Can't even remember what it was, something in research. I don't even know. I hated it because I was like, this is so pointless. I'm learning how to read research. Why do I need to learn how to do this? I'm not a researcher. And turns out it was actually pretty valuable. And I did not listen. So it took me a while to get back into actually reading research because I didn't really know what the hell it was for or how to apply it. So I really struggled with like understanding the concepts. So I like to share what I learned from mine and help those who don't read research. And I know there's a lot of you because you've told me that you just can't come at reading a whole piece of paper, a whole paper, and then pulling bits and pieces of it and actually clinically applying it. So if that is you, those emails will be perfect for you because it does it for you. And you can subscribe to that email list and get them every month if you like. I don't send anything else out in the month, so you will not worry about being spammed. I don't have time for that. But if you would like to join the email list, you can do that through the show notes. Anyway, I have the paper here now. And today's paper is Intra-abdominal pressures during activity in women using an intravaginal pressure transducer. So I am quite excited about this paper because I feel like a lot of people are always asking me, what is pelvic floor safe? What exercises generate high levels of pressure? What exercises are lower pressure? And what should I be? Well, most of my people that are asking me are often clients as well. Like, what is safe for my pelvic floor if I have prolapse or if I have, I don't know, tightness? But in the case of practitioners, it's always a similar question, but in a less obvious format because we have a bit more awareness than the healthy population who are not trained as health professionals. Anyway, so here is the paper I'm showing you if you're looking on YouTube. And basically, I want to recap this because I think it is extremely valuable in the information that it presents. So I have my list of notes here that I'm going to be sharing with you. So if I'm looking off the screen and you're watching this, you'll know why. And if it sounds like I'm reading bits and pieces, it's probably because I am. Because who has time to memorize a script? Anyway, so basically, let's recap firstly. If you did miss last month's research spotlight email, which is actually the month before that, because it was February's, then I did a paper on hip strength, and symptoms of urinary urgency and frequency, because we all hear research that is around incontinence and leaking. However, there are a lot of other symptoms, and I feel like none of the papers really cover that, or they're very rare. So I did share that in the email, but if you missed the email, there's also a podcast episode on this, and you would have seen that in earlier episodes. So go and have a listen if you would like to learn more about that, or if you see clients who have urgency and frequency symptoms rather than actual incontinence. So today, though, we're looking at pressure generated in different activities and what that looks like. So I've chosen this because of that same reason. What exercises are pelvic floor safe? How do we know which ones to actually prescribe? And are there blanket rules, basically? So we're going to come to that decision by the end when we recap. However, the primary purpose of the actual study was to explore whether or not there was an association between physical activity and intra-abdominal pressure, and then determine if strenuous activities of those higher intensity exercises, or any of them, actually increase the risk of pelvic floor dysfunction or not. And then second to that purpose, the study was designed to compare the pressures between activities with varying levels of intensity. So same activity, different levels of intensity, as well as then compare pressure measures that were obtained during those specific activities to something like coughing, which was is usually like the baseline standard of measuring intra-abdominal pressure because it is eliciting very high amounts of pressure. So they were using those like exercises and then comparing them to coughing, and are they higher or lower, or where do they sit on that spectrum? So that's what the study did. Now, just to touch on intra-abdominal pressure, because that gets thrown around a lot in the pelvic floor world. And if you don't know what that is, it basically means pressure described by the steady state of, well, it's actually intra-abdominal pressure describes the steady state of pressure that is concealed within the abdominal cavity. And this generally results from the interaction between the abdominal wall and the visceral organs. Intra-abdominal pressure usually oscillates, well, it does oscillate according to different phases of the respiratory cycle and with the amount of resistance in the abdominal wall. It is extremely important in pelvic health because most of the time this pressure is going to be pushed somewhere and it's going to follow the line of least resistance. So if there is pelvic floor problems, it's going to go downwards. If it's high amounts of pressure, if there's abdominal wall laxity, it's going to go in that direction. And if we do a lot of high generating pressure activities all the time, this can expose those tissues to a lot of overload. In this case, it is negative and can weaken those structures. So that is the point of intra-abdominal pressure and why it gets thrown around in pelvic health a lot. There are a lot of pressure-based issues. Hernias are one, hemorrhoids are another, prolapse is a pressure-based issue in a sense of the musk world. So keep that in the back of your mind, which is why it is usually measured in these papers. Anyway, the paper. Let's get back to the paper. So 57 women who already engage in vigorous exercise at least 3 times a week were recruited for the study. They were given an intra-vaginal pressure transducer, which is basically like this little gel-filled tampon that had a sensor sealed on the inside of it, and that was inserted vaginally like a tampon, and then it was a little external antenna that was attached to the abdominal wall on the outside, and that would communicate with the tech in the lab. So that was the pressure sensor, the measurer. That's how they did that. Women were then performed 31, where they performed 31 activities. And this was including a range of different exercises. And it started with clinical assessments. There were light, moderate, and vigorous intensity exercise tasks. And they also had in routine household tasks as well. So they were measuring all these different types of exercises on all levels of intensity. They were given instructions in regard to either number of reps for that particular task or continuing that task for 30-second time intervals. The session was about an hour, and it was like they started with a warm-up, they progressed to higher levels of activity or higher intensity activities, and then they followed them up with a bit of the easier tasks to reduce their heart rate, and then ended with stretching activity. So they followed like a bit of a protocol in a sense of the order of activities. They did also measure supine pelvic floor contractions, and this was actually to make sure that they were in fact getting readings of intra-abdominal pressure, and it wasn't like if the transducer had slipped down into sort of like the lower vagina, it was like not the actual pelvic floor muscle strength contraction that it was measuring. It was inserted into the upper vagina, which was a little bit better at, I guess, measuring the pressure from above in the abdomen. So they did do that as well, so they could see. And then outcomes that they actually measured, there was 3 in particular. Maximal pressure during the activity. They measured the area under the cove, which was under the cove. Today, my speech is shocking. I'm sorry. But I'm just going to keep rolling with it because otherwise, if I try and redo this and record it based on that, it's probably not going to happen. So excuse me if I sound not super professional today. It's been a day. Second measure, let's try that again, area under the curve. And this was to reflect the amplitude and the duration of the pressure in the activity. And the last thing that they measured was the first moment of the area. And this was to overcome the limitation of being able to distinguish the long duration but low pressure activities from short duration high pressure activities. So that could distinguish a little bit more, I guess, variation and changes within pressure in each exercise. Now, I don't know about you, but I always feel like when you get a research paper and it talks about the exercise intervention or the protocol, there's always like, there's never a lot of information, or there's sometimes, let's say sometimes, I'm blanket ruling, there's not a lot of, this is exactly what they did. These are the exercises that they did. This is the reps. This is the set. This is the time. This is the rest interval. I feel like they never really tell you about the exercise protocol and the actual exercises that they put in there. Well, I just find that, especially with musculoskeletal, like strength exercises, like hip strength exercises, they kind of blanket rule. But anyway, I find that sometimes that's not included. So this paper had 31 exercises. So in this case, I'm like, they're telling me they're varying intensities, but what are they? And there's a list in here, and there's a big table that basically includes every single exercise and all of the variations in results on the tables, which is so good because now I know exactly what exercises there are and I can read them all versus just like pre and post measures. So anyway, I want to talk you through them. I know there's a lot, but I'm going to read them all. I'm not going to read them from here. I'm going to read them from my list because it's structured a little bit easier to understand. But this will give you an idea about what those exercises looked like and how that they would be clinically relevant to you in your work. So they broke them down into 6 particular categories, and they were clinical assessments, aerobic activities, household activities, lifting tasks, calisthenic exercises or activities, and then stretching activities. So clinical assessments, they did coughing, lying Valsalva, and then a seated Valsalva. There was 3. Aerobic activities. So they did walking at 4.8 kilometers per hour on 0% incline, and then they did the same thing at 7% incline. So that change in intensity was incline based. Then they changed the speed as well. So they did walking at 5.6 kilometers per hour with an incline of 7%. And then they did a walking at 4.3 kilometers per hour at 0% incline, but holding an 11.4 kilogram weight. They did running between 8 and 9.7 kilometers per hour with a 0% incline. They did stepping on a 20 centimeter step. And they did seated cycling at 300 kilograms per meter per minute. Per minute. Yeah, that looks right. kg/m/minute. Yeah, whatever. Power output, I would assume that is. And then seated cycling at 600, measuring of 600, and then standing cycling at 900 kilograms per meter per minute. I feel like I'm not saying that right, but that's what it says. Anyway, whatever. 3 different intensities. Anyway, household activities, moving on. A racing board / dusting. I would assume that's dusting. I don't really know what an erasing board is, but maybe I don't do enough household activities. Jokes. They did scrubbing the floor on hands and knees. Do I scrub the floor on hands and knees? Probably not, but I stand. But let's say you did that, then this is happening. And then standing to sit. Stand to sit. That's cute. I like sit to stand personally, but stand to sit. So household activities are a little bit confusing, I might say, but you get the idea. Lifting tasks. They did lifting 13.6 kilograms from floor to counter and back, lifting 18.2 kilograms in the same thing, floor to counter and back, and then seated shoulder press at 3.6 kgs, seated shoulder press at 4.5, at 5.5, at 6.8, and 9.1. So that would be overhead tasks for lifting, which I'm fairly certain, if I look this up, generate a lot of pressure. Anyway, too much to read on the paper, but I find overhead work a lot hard for people with incontinence or pelvic floor issues or prolapse because of the pressure from the weight above the head going down through the trunk. So I would imagine that would have been high. Calisthenic activities, abdominal curl up, full sit-ups with feet held, isometric side bridges, modified Supermans, push-ups from knees, and jumping. And then stretching activities were seated hamstring stretch, low back stretch, and side lying quad stretch. So interesting. A lot of variation in movements here. And there's so many measures and changes between pressures in the results when you compare all like the 3 different things they're looking for in pressure change, plus each different variation of exercise, and then within women. So there's like a lot of numbers, and that's not really something I wanted to dive into in this episode, because if you want to read all of that, you can just go read the paper. I would suggest you do if you want the ins and outs of all of the different measures. But what I really, really wanted to get across in this, and something that I found extremely relevant from this study, is that, and this was actually one of the key takeaways, is that there is a very wide range of intra-abdominal pressures among different women doing the exact same activity. It was also noted that the greatest degree of variability was actually in the more novel exercises, where the participants were required to control their level of effort. So an example of that would have been the Valsalva. The jumping exercise was one, standing cycling was another one, whereas they sort of had the greatest variability, whereas the littlest amount of variability was in exercises like walking. That was actually more, they actually reported it in the study as being more familiar to the person. And obviously everyone knows how to walk well. It's general, it's a daily thing, it's standard. And I think this feedback in itself, so the fact that there was extremely different results between women doing the same exercise, and don't forget these women were already doing higher intensity exercise anyway. This is such an important piece of information for us as exercise pros. Let's talk about why that is. Because if you are in MUSC rehab, or you know a bit about MUSC rehab, you'll know that usually we program clients with particular thresholds that keep clients within safe zones that usually optimize a particular outcome or adaptation in the tissue, and they meet prerequisites before they move on. And when it comes to pelvic floor health, we usually term exercises as low or high intra-abdominal pressure generating activities. And that is what we would use to classify whether or not the exercise was safe for the pelvic floor, or not in some cases. The large variability in pressure measures within the study shows that if we were to actually blanket rule certain exercises as this is a high generating activity and this is a low pressure generating activity, we could actually be unnecessarily restricting exercises that aren't problematic for the individual that we're helping, and they could actually be more helpful, or the opposite way. And I think this is so important to understand, that the level of effort and perhaps maybe the familiarity of the actual activity is what is more important for pressure generation. And of course, how the person is performing the exercise rather than the actual exercise choice itself. So super important when it comes to any point of the female life cycle and there is pelvic floor involved. Pregnancy, postnatal care, transitioning to menopause, anywhere. There's other phases of the life cycle, but right now they're the ones that are ringing a bell. Clinically, I've actually seen this in consults where we've sort of, they've started to do these, what is, I would say, easier exercises, and they're generally considered lower pressure because they're not hard and they're supported in supine, and they have terrible pressure management. And then I've put them in like a high plank hold or upright overhead weighted exercises, and they have great pressure management strategy. So when we think about that, it doesn't make sense. Like, these ones are a lot harder. A high plank hold is a lot easier than a laying on your back single leg lift, and their pressure management changes. So obviously for that person, there are different things going on that are contributing to the way that that person is executing the exercise, maybe managing their pressure, maybe their connection in that area, what position are they in, all these different things. So I think this whole concept is something that really needs to be considered when we're looking at what is safe for the individual versus what exercises are pelvic floor safe. So it's all about that particular person and how they are responding to the exercise, what level of effort they are putting in, and what do they need help with. As exercise professionals, I think that the hardest part of prescribing pelvic floor safe exercises, I'm doing like little inverted things here, for an individual, is actually knowing what an exercise should look like and what it should feel like in a sense of pressure being managed really well, and being able to watch someone like your client do the exercise and know what signs are of poor pressure management and what is signaling better pressure management, and then how do we either regress or progress or modify the actual exercise in order to optimize how that exercise is actually performed at a level that is enough to stimulate change and adaptation, not too much that pressure is mismanaged and we're either making it harder for that person or overloading the system too regularly or too much as well. So I do this. This is something that I think is so important. It is the biggest part of the mentorship, aside from obviously the theory of what all this means, but the mentorship side is the clinical application of exercise. And we are looking at every single exercise in the database and what do we need to be mindful of? How do we know it's being performed really well from an external point of view? Because we're not internally assessing at the same time. And then how do we change this? What do we need to give that person in terms of cues, maybe their body position, the level of intensity or effort? Can we change it in any way that helps that person perform the exercise with much, I want to say, more challengeable control, more control, but with challenge? I don't know, a little bit of challenge, but not too much in that sense. So that's what we actually do. I think that is so important in a sense of what we do. That is why it's in the mentorship, and that is why the mentorship is actually so big, because there are a lot of exercises in there, and I think it's really important that you know that part of it. So it's not just about theory, it's about the application. Anyway, speaking of that though, there are plans to do smaller, bite-sized content education formats for everybody, because I know that not everybody is interested in doing a full-blown pelvic floor or pelvic health mentorship program, even though I think that's the best way to learn about it. I know that a lot of you see other people, other populations, and you don't want to invest a whole year of your time learning about this. So there will be future education available for you. I am working in the background for that. And if this is something that you're interested in, please let me know, because I'd love to start like a bit of a list, or there might be some trial versions of this where we trial it with a smaller group of people, make sure it makes sense, get your feedback on it, and then obviously modify. That's what happened technically with the first round of the mentorship. So if you are interested, please let me know, because I would love to keep you in the loop of when that's happening, because it will probably not be advertised on my social media as such. Maybe on my email list if you're on my email list, so make sure you're on that if you want to know more, but that will be coming. But otherwise, if you want to learn more about all of the different exercises and all the different variations, just download the research paper. I'll try and put the link in the show notes for you so you can see that. But otherwise, that brings you today's episode or recap of the research spotlight that was last month. If you want to be on the list and receive the next one, it comes out on the 1st of every single month. And so that'll be coming out on the 1st of April. Yes, I still count my months on my fingers and have to say them out loud because I forget. April Fool's Day. Maybe I'll send out a funny one and it will be like, got ya. I'll have to think about how to do that. That would be hard. Anyway, that'll be the next one. But otherwise, don't forget, if you love this and you've learned something and you think it would be helpful, send it to your friends or your colleagues or anyone that you think might find this valuable. Spread the word, because without the word being spread, I can't provide more of this content unless people care about it. So yeah, there you have it. Otherwise, have a fabulous day from wherever you are. Thanks again for being here. I appreciate you investing your attention in listening to my voice once again. And I will see you in the next one. Bye.